I think you said it a second ago, scouting. So I wanted to ask you a little bit more about scouting because that's listed down as kind of one of your responsibilities currently. I'm presuming is that kind of something that you still do with the opposition scouting. So I wanted to ask then, Dan, can you mainly for the viewers in terms of tips and advice potentially if they're going to watch a game as a scouting the next opponent, what kind of things would you recommend they look at? Maybe common tips that people miss out on, or just ways to kind of structure a report potentially, just to learn a little bit more from someone that's doing that day to
Mhm.
day.
Yeah, I mean, first thing I always try to do is get a just general picture of the opponent. So, for instance, our next one is Sporting Kansas City on the weekend, and I've already finished the majority of the analysis for that. And I think it's really important to try to find a match or two matches or three where they're playing against an opponent similar to the way that we're going to play.
Yeah,
Um, I think it's also important to look at where was the match played? Do they change when they play home and away? Right now, it's early in the season, so it's hard to kind of see those trends over time, see if things are changing. You also see a lot of players, in the early part of the MLS season joining rosters late or um, just the first 2 weeks is it's very difficult to get a picture of who's going to be starting.
mm,
And now we're only in week 5 and 6. So, you want to say, okay, here's going to be their starting 11, but I think a lot of teams are still figuring that out. Um, so, it is important to kind of try to lay the foundation of what you're going to be up against, but it is difficult this earlier in the season. That being said, I think you can gain a lot of insight just starting out by looking at some stats and some reports that you can really trust. I mean, we ingest the tracking data, and that gives us kind of a good picture overall in the last however many games of how a certain team is playing, and we can filter by the certain opponents, by the certain formations they've faced, how they're going to play, just from visualization perspective. I'll always check in with that first before I look at any video, and then I'll try to see if the video shows me anything different from what I've seen there. I also look at some stats. I'll try to see, are these opponents the team type of teams who like to play in behind a lot? Do they expand the field? Are they using the width, or are they trying to play in half spaces inside? Are they using those half spaces, or are they not really breaking lines that often? Do they like to build with 3-1, or are they building 3-2? Are they creating numbers centrally, or are they keeping numbers on the last line? And being able to use the different data sources and statistical websites that we have access to, I'm able to kind of just paint a picture for myself before I dive into the video. And most of the time, what I see leading up to the video, it's usually affirmed by what I see in the pictures. So, I'll try to just look when I look at a match of an opponent, just try to get any insight that any patterns that I'm seeing, any similarities, but also trying to see, are they changing things based on what the opponent is doing? And a lot of teams in the MLS are pretty tactically sophisticated, so the players are thinking on a high level, and they see the opponents doing things that are different. They'll adjust to those things, and part of my job is trying to pinpoint those and obviously break things down by phases and try to find the patterns within those phases of play. And like I said, 5 games in, it's tough to see those things yet, but a lot of teams have been playing the same way for several years now, and they have that kind of history with the same coach. So you kind of have an idea going in. And that's, going back to what I said when I was at New York, looking at the individual players. I think I started to get a foundation for what teams were like back then. And I've obviously followed the league since then. So I'm working with kind of 6 or 7 years of experience, and some of the coaches in the MLS are still those same coaches that were there 6 or 7 years ago. So, you have just a general idea and picture of what teams are going to play like. Um, and then, personally, I do like to just watch some games on the broadcast on TV. It just gives a different perspective. I think you can see the players' behaviors a lot better than you can from the panoramic tactical view. And you can see them physically. How do they engage in challenges? How do they get out of challenges? How physical they are. You really only see that in the broadcast, in my opinion. And so I like to just kind of put the computer to the side, switch the TV on sometimes, and watch the opponent's last match on TV. And I think that gives me a bit of clarity just on one, how they are tactically, and also how they are on an individual point of view.
Yeah. Yeah, that was an important point about kind of watching the teams against teams that are similar to you. I think that's definitely some people, at least in the beginnings, maybe don't do enough of, or at least they kind of don't think of that. So, you could go back and do the last two games, but they could be away from home against teams that play completely different to you. You'd rather go back maybe four games if you can to a much more similar game. And the same would go for if you're scouting particular players, how does that particular player play against this type of team and how do they play in that type of team or that type of formation. So definitely if you are scouting, look as many different scenarios and things as you can basically. So yeah, definitely a good point there. So where does set plays fall in, Dan? Are you doing set plays or is somebody else looking at that? How does that work?
Yeah, so our goalkeeper goalkeeper coach Drew is responsible for the defensive set pieces, and he has been for years. I assist him. I will supply him with videos, and we do a somewhat tedious process, which I think actually does benefit everybody. It's a little bit more work for the analyst, but we'll tag each individual player with his name and his number, and we use the telestration tools a lot when it comes to set pieces, and I know Drew's very appreciative of the work we put in on that end, and he is very thorough with the work he does. I also assist Michelle, who's our assistant coach, who takes care of the attacking set piece side of things. And I'll work together with him. He'll ask my opinion on certain weaknesses of the opponent, and we want to give as much information to the players as possible without overloading them. So when it comes to set pieces, teams can do things different based on the opponent and just the general situation of a set piece, but really analysis can help pinpoint patterns, and that's where I come in and I can help them with those telestration tools, really highlight what is important in this clip, what we really think they're going to do.